As I shared in my last video, Hurricane Helene absolutely devastated Asheville and the surrounding western North Carolina region. This is insane. This is the massive pole that the shipping container hit. I am so beyond grateful that it just tapped it and that it didn't hit it head on, because I had no idea that the base looked like this. The destruction that I've seen with my own two eyes is unbelievable, though I now believe it as I've seen it right in front of me. I expected that something like this would cause a lot of fear, panic, and desperation, but I have seen quite the opposite. I've experienced more love, kindness, and generosity from everyone I encounter, more than I have ever experienced in my whole entire life. I only had one uncomfortable incident with a gas station employee who yelled at me for a mistake that I made, but once I got him to make eye contact with me, he immediately stopped himself and sincerely apologized for the yelling. I don't think I've ever seen anyone de-escalate and turn things around that quickly. From everything I've heard, the gas stations were where all the fighting and the looting and the gunshots happened, so I imagine that guy was having a very stressful week. But I've got to say, I've heard of very little anger and violence in general, and I've seen absolutely none of it. I feel completely safe out in the community everywhere I go. From my perspective, it's been very peaceful and cooperative, especially when you consider everything that we've gone through and are still going through. This was a winery. Had a beautiful mural painted on the side. On that back side, it's completely flattened. Gone. I really want to share the beauty that's hidden among all this tragedy, because mainstream media typically shows all the most horrific or dramatic parts of a disaster, which is one of the reasons why I haven't paid attention to the news in almost 20 years. I've had several people tell me that the news is saying that we don't have any help around here, and it's been super confusing to me. But I think it's because they're focusing on help from the federal government. Speaking from my personal experience, other than a handful of Chinooks I've seen flying around, I haven't seen any representation from the federal government or the military, which is actually pretty weird when I think about it, now that I actually have the brain capacity to think about it. What I have seen, though, is an overwhelming amount of help coming from all over the US and even from Canada. There was an electrical truck from Canada driving in front of me on the highway last night. I've seen police officers from other counties all over North Carolina. I've seen arborists and electricians coming from other states. Thanks to some really sweet electricians from South Carolina, I got my power restored on Saturday night after 8.5, almost 9 days of no electricity. I've seen volunteers from all over the country and an overwhelming amount of volunteer support coming from within our own community. I haven't seen them, but I've heard of search and rescue teams from around the U.S. I've heard of private citizens using their own helicopters to rescue stranded people. There are crews from all over the place here to help rebuild our water system. We have 1,800 miles worth of pipe that need to be inspected and repaired, and they don't expect us to have water for weeks. But everywhere you go, there's water on every corner. And individual people and businesses who have water are sharing with those of us who don't. I personally haven't had any water since day 2, which was September 28th, and today is Monday, October 7th. I don't really have the capacity to count how many days that's been, but you can do it on your own. So while I personally have not seen anyone from the federal government or the military, I've seen an incredible amount of individual people and businesses stepping up and coming together to do what you would expect the federal government to do. Like I mentioned in my last video, everyone who I encounter asks me if I need food or water. I had a woman stop me when she saw me with Maggie the other day, and she asked if I needed dog food. I don't. I'm pretty prepared for this. She's got a lot of food, and I also have 2 months worth of her essential medication saved up. I also mentioned that my neighbor, who's had power since day 2, charged my generator for me when it completely died on a cloudy day. Right after I posted that video, another neighbor who ended up leaving town with her family because they have 2 young kids, she and her husband left their Tesla for us to use, for 2 of us to use, so we wouldn't have to burn through any of our gas. They also completely cleaned out their refrigerator and their pantry and gave all their food away. She asked me to bring those donations to the fire station and the food pantry. They are just incredibly kind and generous people. Also, one of my friends found out that he had electricity at his vacation home, which is on a well. So since Thursday, I've been able to go up there and take a shower and wash my laundry and do my dishes and charge my electronics, though thankfully I don't have to charge the electronics anymore. And it has been absolutely life-changing. He and his wife are also super kind and generous people. I originally went down to the River Arts District one evening. I can't remember what day it was, but it was pretty close to curfew, and a very kind police officer allowed me to park and walk into the district as long as I was back home by 7:30 p.m. And since I didn't have a lot of time, I had to run. When I first got down there, the destruction was absolutely overwhelming. I couldn't control my breathing. I started crying. It was just pretty hard to believe everything that I was seeing in front of me. And I hadn't even approached the worst part of it at that point. Thankfully, the running helped to calm me down because the destruction just got worse the further I went in. I had less than an hour, but I really wanted to check on this little tree that I've befriended. It almost died in a drought that we had earlier this year, and I saw it spring back to life after we got some water. And I've just been giving it so much love every time I see it. I was thinking about that little tree as it was maybe 20 to 30 feet underwater, just hoping that it would survive. When I got down there, I found the tree was just completely flat on the ground, but it still had some green leaves, so I promised it that I was going to come back in the morning and prop it up and clean up its branches and do whatever I can to help it stay alive. I expected to be mostly alone when I went down there in the morning, but when I got there, there were well over 100 people at one of the artist studios, which is right across from my little tree, and they were helping artists to get everything out of their studios. From what I can remember, it was the only building that was still fully standing in that area. I think he said it was over 120 years old, and the walls are just this thick brick. They looked like they were maybe 2.5 feet thick. And so the building made it. After propping up my little tree, I decided to join them. And the organizers said that there were very few people who were actually affiliated with any of the artists. And most of us were just random community members who came by to help out. I started out by digging some mud, which was super heavy. So I was really grateful that that task didn't last very long. And then after that, I went around to the back side of the building to see what else I could do. And I found an artist who had a studio on the top floor. And I started helping him to clear out his stuff. When I went into the building, though, that top floor had this extremely intense toxic chemical smell to it. So I went home to get a respirator and to change my shoes. And then I came back and I worked for a couple of hours. The next day, my landlord's cousin, who had come out from Chattanooga to volunteer, he helped to tune up my chainsaw, and then we went into my neighbor's yard and we started cutting up the fallen trees into manageable chunks so they could clear out and repair their yard. I still have quite a bit of work to do over there, but we got the worst of it taken care of together. I can only speak for Asheville as that's all I've seen, but this city has turned into a giant love-filled volunteer festival. Everywhere I go, people are volunteering their time, giving out free food and water, offering first aid, and setting up donation and distribution sites for food, water, clothes, baby supplies, and basically anything anyone would need to get through this. At the very same time, living through Hurricane Helene has been the most horrifying and the most beautiful experience of my life. I've seen the absolute best of humanity in all of this, so I really wanted to share my perspective to give all of you some hope. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm going to be putting together another video on emergency preparation, just based off of what I've experienced here and everything that I've used, everything that I wish that I had. I've started a page on my website where I've added all the supplies that I've had and then the things that I wished I had to it, so if you do want to prepare, which I highly suggest you do after going through this, you can just easily click through to the Amazon links to buy whatever is there. or obviously you can get it locally if needed. But I highly suggest that you think about this beforehand, because when it hits, everybody needs the same supplies, and so the stores start running out of these things. I've linked that page in the description down below. So thank you so much for watching this, and I really appreciate all the love and the support that you've been sending our way throughout all of this. We have really needed it.